Good evening. I believe I am live now. So let's take a look at this nice PowerPoint I have made on summertime patterns. See if I can figure out how to pull this puppy up here. Okay. Sweet. Summertime patterns. Clayton Westfall Professional Fishing Guide. Bushwhacker Bait Company. Wow. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is Canyon Lake, which is my home lake. And this is um, clearly on a topo type feature map. And the things I want to emphasize when I'm looking for a summertime type location are the following. So, just basically looking at this map, the things that stand out to me, I mean, everybody here locally knows this section of the lake I'm going to talk about, but for those who don't, let me explain. So there's this little crescent shape um, area here on the screen where my cursor is. That kind of is an area where there's super deep contour breaks, and you got this little island out here, and it comes out to this main lake point. Um, you see the creek channel that runs this way, and it kind of meanders and then dips in adjacent to this strip of land here, as well as kind of out from that point, wrapping around towards the tip of the point, from the island, rather, all the way over to the tip of the point. It's fairly severe as in terms of the break. So this creek right here is in the vicinity of the number 6 boat ramp, and a lot of the people I know, that's where they launch their boats. So anyway, it's a really popular creek. Um, the main things that stick out to me that I want to emphasize are when I'm looking for a summertime location, I'm first focusing on an area in the lake where historically it's really well known for spawning, and since that's the focal point of a bass's life cycle, that's the first thing I'm going to think about is where does the fish spawn. So there's an area over here, actually. This actually really from this boat ramp over here, this number 5, this is number 6 I was talking about, but this number 5, there's an area where you have a flat that runs along this entire side here, um, and kind of like comes up, obviously there's a few cuts here or whatever, but they're not really, the depth change isn't super substantial in that area. It's kind of like a big flat. And it's hard to tell really by the contour lines. Um, but this is like a major spawning flat right here. It's always been, and anybody who lives here knows that. So that being said, to me, naturally, the first place where they would move to post spawn, excuse me, to get to the main lake is they would kind of travel around the corner here to the tip of the point, and if they kept going, they would probably wrap around and either migrate along this edge where they can make their way and travel to this little saddle over here. That's like a really good summertime area, because with the prevailing wind that blows through here, that little saddle creates an area where the bait fish can be pushed through, and the big fish kind of just sit around here and catch them coming over. So there's oftentimes a lot of schools out here that are just waiting, I guess. And there's a few different ways that I catch them out there, but I guess for right now, the main um, point I want to make is just that we've established that this creek here is a good creek. This is a spawning flat within the creek. as you can see, there's a couple little, you know, minor arms and stuff, and then it goes to the back and a few points mixed in here and there. But anyway, this is a very good creek. There's a lot of fish in this creek all year round. Um, but this point is a really well-known point, and it's actually one of the fishing hotspots on the map. Yeah, this is not like the point that I fish all the time, but it's worth mentioning because it's a lot of people fish it, and there's fish on it at certain times of the year. But so if you look at the way the contour line comes around and then situates around the front of the point, and then you see that this back half is all kind of flat. The area where it transitions from flat to the severity on this point, this little area right here is really, really good for pre-post spawn. That's a staging area, and I identified that a while back. But see, this whole area's got like flooded bushes on it, and the depth varies between like 2 to 5 foot to like, you know, 10 to 15 foot to, you know, out in this point it could be like 20 feet or whatever. But a key thing to focus on, I think, is in transitioning from, you know, spawning right here to go to the deeper water, that little break right there where it goes from super severe to flat, that's a really good gathering spot for on that corner for fish to stage up. So I've caught them in there before doing that, looking at that. And then as the year progresses, or the season progresses rather, obviously I spend more time out on the front of the point and the back side over here. And then I work my way across, you know, the back of this little crescent over to these islands, and then I told you about this saddle. So that, like, main lake points to me, I mean, all the other stuff that I mentioned is important, but main lake points to me in the summertime are extremely attractive. And I break everything up in thirds as far as the section of the creek I'm working in. So this would be like the back third, this would be the second third, and this would be the first third. Um, and you know, like this is a point that comes out as well. I would focus on the first third in the summertime, and I know that there's a lot of bait fish being blown around, and you know, fish taking different migration routes, you know, along this channel, and a lot of movement. But you know, the beauty about this point here is that not only does it go from shallow to deep really quickly, and you have it where it swings in and the break swings in and touches the bank right there, but this point faces directly into the main lake right here, and it receives a lot of fresh water constantly. So that's extremely, extremely important. And then the way the sun sets up, this crescent gets a lot of shade throughout the day. And so I think that's a natural place for fish to inhabit, but if they want, they can go out and meander on this point, and there's a lot of deeper brush and stuff in here, and there's gravel and rock and stuff. It's like a really good area. So, you know, looking at it, I would say that firstly, of course, the fresh water is a productive creek. They spawn really close by. They make that little loop from that flat out to the corner of this point and then across. And there's fish constantly moving this way and this way, you know, both directions. So this is kind of like a junction. But yeah, it's got good gradation to it. It's got a substantial amount of sloping. Right here, it looks like it's kind of flat in this area because there's like two different tiers. It's like a deeper platform and then a shallower platform. But the shallow platform, depending on how much water is on the point, may be like, you know, 8 foot or something. And then it may be like 15, 20 foot on the edge, the far edge. So there's like two different tiers, it seems like to me. I mean, that's just my experience. But All the things that I talked about as far as the rock and the gravel, the standing, brush timber in there, um, it being like a major junction as far as the fish traveling back and forth, fresh water. I mean, it's just super, super good point. Um, it's just a major landmark. So, that being said, let me click into this next slide here. See if I can figure this out. So this is what I call the water stratification, and um, I'm just imagining that this is the point, that point that I had showed you guys on the map. But without getting too sciencey, this is what they call the epilimnion, which is like the more oxygen-rich layer. This is the top layer. The thermocline, which is the barrier between the top layer and the bottom layer, and then the bottom layer, which is the hypolimnion. And the hypolimnium is it is not oxygen rich. So all the matter that scatters around the lake that settles out to the bottom and decomposes, which is called detritus, that's all within the hypolimnion, and fish can't process metabolically at that level. So while and then also I want to point out that the light doesn't penetrate all the way down there, and that's part of why that is why really it's, aside from the decomposition, it's not oxygen rich. I mean, decomposition requires oxygen to take place, but the oxygen rich environment up top where the light penetrates and things grow and oxygen's produced is in this epilimnion. So this border here, this thermocline, the closer you get to it, also the cooler the water is and the more comfortable the fish are. But there's a threshold there where they don't want to cross into the hypolimnion and risk not being able to process metabolically. So it's like as close as you can get to that thermocline without going downward to the hypolimnion. That's a lot of times where the fish are driven, depending on how hot it gets and fishing pressure and different things, when they suspend. But there's like several ways that I would look at fishing series. So anyways, the first, I want to backtrack a little bit. Looking at your electronics, it's important to know that you can adjust your sensitivity and whatnot to see the thermocline. If you turn it way up, you're going to see a lot of junk. You're going to see a lot of trash and stuff as far as like scattered signals, and it's a lot more sensitive, so it's like more cloudy, I guess. It's harder to distinguish different pieces, but oddly enough and ironically enough, you can see the thermocline because it's so sensitive that it identifies a temperature difference in the density that's resultant of the temperature difference. So you can see where the thermocline is and whatnot. But I think this is a great picture for the point. And what I want to demonstrate is like you look and you see that this first area here has slope to it, but it's not as severe as it is right here. And that's kind of how that point is set up. There's like this first area and then the second area, and then it kind of drops off. But a lot of the fish position, at different parts depending on how much cloud cover there is, or how bright the sun is or whatever, and also what stage of the year it is. The techniques that I use mostly. So let me just say this: majority of the day in the summer, the fish aren't up here. They're over here where this bass icon is, this little bass guy. And the reason is because they're in like a negative state. They're just suspending and kind of just waiting until it's time to feed. And they kind of shut down so that they can utilize their resources and not expend a ton of energy. So if your bait's up here, you're not really doing any good. I mean, if your boat's out here and you're casting into this area, it's not really that effective. I mean, you really want to get to these fish, so why would you fish a bait on the bottom over here, if the fish are up top? I mean, they're never even going to see the bait. And not only that, but their strike window is really small. and they're not willing to go far to pursue a bait if they are at all. I mean, a lot of times it's just reactionary that they want to, branch out and hit something. So these fish here, you have to think about how you're going to get to them. In my experience, there's several different ways, but in clear water, you know, preferentially my ways are like Carolina rig, suspending jerk bait, sometimes swim baits. But to me, for the swim baits, if I was gonna fish the swim bait, the break here needs to have like big chunk rock or something like trees or something to where I can make contact with the swim bait so that it changes directions or darts around kind of erratically. Because when you pull the swim bait out and it's just you're just constantly reeling it, a lot of times they just follow it and they don't bite it. But it's not really, it doesn't really have the reactionary. There is no reactionary really, unless you know burn it and then kill it, really really fast and stop it. Um, but Carolina rig is good. So with the Carolina rig, um, I cast it out on the top of the point, but when I'm bringing it back, the weight's obviously in front with the bait behind, and I'm pulling it, pulling it, pulling it, and you know, once the weight goes over the top, the bait kind of follows real quickly. And the thing I don't like about that is that if you're fishing from the main lake towards the point and you drag that weight and you pull it down here, the weight crawls down and then the bait pulls over the top and it goes straight down and it never gets to the fish out here. So what I think is the best way to do it is either to do like a transverse approach where you cast across the point, or you get up shallow and cast out and bring it back. So if you were to cast out, your weight falls in and your bait's behind it, but your weight is swinging towards the structure, and your bait's still falling on an arc, and the bait's likely to pass the fish on that arc, right? So um, it makes more sense to cast outwards and then bring it back in rather than be positioned out here and throw towards the shallow, just because that bait never swings in front of the fish. So I don't know if that makes total sense, but that's the best way I can explain it. Is it's just the way that the way that the sinker falls and the bait pulls behind the sinker. You never really get a chance for the fish to see it if they're truly suspended off the tip of the point, if you're casting from the main lake towards the bank. Um, it just doesn't. That weight swings freely, so when you cast outwards from the bank, if you were close to the bank with your boat casting outwards, the weight swings freely, so it's going to swing down, and then the bait's going to delay, and it's kind of going to be behind, and then it'll pass in front of the fish before it makes contact here, and then you could walk it up the point, and the bait will still be in front of the fish. Um, so I may touch on that a little bit, here in a little while, but that's the best way I could explain. Is it's inefficient in my opinion. That's just my opinion, to cast from out in the main lake towards the shore rather than get on the bank or cast across or whatever to make sure that weight stays in contact with the front of the point and the bait glides in front of the fish. So let me show you my bait of choice here. The Zoom Super Fluke. This is like the best fluke, in my opinion. It's just simple. I don't want to make things complicated. For clear water, these are my two favorite colors. Actually, this top one is my favorite color, period, but the bottom one and the top one are good for clear water. This is the Arkansas Shiner. That's like, you can go anywhere in the South, in my opinion, and fish that, and it's just super good. I mean, it's just all around good color and everything. It's got a little bit of contrast on here, so it's good in slightly stained water. This down here is like the albino shad, and it's super iridescent on the sides. And in super clear water, it's got like a translucent look, and it kind of bends the light around it, and it really shines well underwater in clear water. So I'd say that would be my first choice in clear water, but the top one here is absolute killer. And I don't like the small junior fluke or whatever. I like the standard size fluke, sometimes the Magnum fluke, but if I'm fishing a tournament and I just need to efficiently catch 5 fish, then I want to just go with the standard size. And I just think that that's makes more sense. If I need to step up to the Magnum after I catch a limit or whatever, that's fine. But these to me are the two flukes I use the very, very most, and I have a ton of them in my box, and I just feel super comfortable and confident with them. The shape of it's good, the profile's good, the little split tail is pretty basic and straightforward, but I know it works. That, like I said, that albino color is just absolutely murdered. It's so good in clear water. But anyway, those are my ones that I like. I'm not sponsored by Zoom. I just really like them. And let me see what I got here next for you. So the Carolina rig, the way it's shown here, they're saying 18 to 36 inch leader. I just pulled this off of Google. I'm not super into the 18-inch leader. I don't really use that. If I use it, it's like in shallow water and I use a super small weight and I'm throwing like a finesse Carolina rig, like maybe if I'm bed fishing or something, or I know that there's beds in the vicinity and I'm kind of casting around looking for fish that are trying to set up. But the 36-inch leader, 3 feet, I mean, that's not even that long. I try to go the longer the better. I mean, always. Obviously, there's a limit as far as castability because the weight being separate from the bait, it's kind of hard to cast it. But I'd rather go like at least 3 feet, 36 inches. That hook on there, I think, is okay. A lot of people like it. I don't really super like it just because I think it's inefficient. Just because I mean the hook point's in line with the eye, and that's good. But I would rather have like a straight shank hook, or offset worm hook. And that's a good hook there. There's nothing wrong with that hook, but that's just not my favorite hook, and I'll show you it here in a bit. That weight and the bead, I use the bead. I mean, some people say it makes a lot of noise when it tracks them. I don't really know about that because I catch fish without a bead, but the other ones that it protects your knot, I mean, I don't know. I'm so used to using that bead that's what I use. I use a plastic bead or a glass bead. The glass bead I'm a little less apt to use because I think sometimes you can crack it and it'll abrade your line. The weight, it needs to be tungsten weight to me. I mean, the most important thing is your pathway from your hands to the fish, just so you can feel the bottom contours and make sure that your weight's making contact with the slope and the bank and everything, the structure. So, number one thing is tungsten. Number two thing is high quality fluorocarbon. You need also, which I don't have in these slides, but you need a super high modulus graphite rod, as high as possible. I mean, if you have all that stuff, that's pretty good. The hook needs to be premium. Kamagatsu is what I use. Tungsten weights here. So, like, I had mentioned that if I'm fishing shallow and it's like a spawning situation or something, like, I'll go with the super small, maybe like an 1/8 ounce. But if I'm fishing, like, the general size for me for Carolina rig fishing is like a 1/2 ounce, 3/4 if it's super deep or if it's like really windy. This is shown with these little inserts in here. I don't like these inserts because they kind of come out sometimes and it's just like coarse in the side of there, and it kind of, I feel like it could abrade your line somewhat. I'm not really into the whole insert thing. I don't want any inserts. Oh, the green weights, to me, I'm way into the green weights because it blends in with the bottom. So that's important to me. Super important. I don't know if it's a confidence thing or what, but I would rather everything look as natural as possible. Um, if I could get green pumpkin hooks, maybe I'd try it. I know it's kind of floating and it's not near the bottom, but or blue hooks or something. I don't know, something that's gonna blend with the water. Maybe, I don't know. But tungsten weights, man, they're huge. They're super dense, and so they transmit feeling better. They're just that's like literally the only way to go. So let's see what I got next here. Seaguar fluorocarbon. I don't fluorocarbon. It's so expensive these days that you could spend $30 on fluorocarbon. Seaguar to me is the best way to go. It's cheap and it's good enough. It does the job. I mean, it's fluorocarbon, so it is the way that the light refracts through it. I think, I don't know, it makes it invisible. And that's the only way to go, man. Fluorocarbon, unless you're fishing something where you want the bait to stay on top, like a top water. I would never throw fluorocarbon because it changes the action. But Seaguar fluorocarbon, man, I would use like 15 or 20 pound test for Carolina rigging, just because there's a lot of cover down there, and the longer your line is, it has more stretch. And fluorocarbon doesn't really have that much stretch, but I don't know. It just kind of seems like it kind of wears your line out. You know, if you have uh, like 10 or 12 pound tests, I would never do that. Like 15 pound test or 20 pound test pretty much is the main thing for me. I used 20 the other day. I feel comfortable with 20, just in case you get wrapped up down there with the trees or whatever. Gamakatsu, obviously. These are the 4/0. I use the 3/0 worm hook like 90% of the time for all my baits. But they say that the straight shank is the most efficient hook. This one has a little offset, so it's kind of in between like an extra wide gap and a straight shank hook as far as efficiency, but it keeps your nose of your bait on there. I like it better. I just think that's like the best hook to use. That's the hook that I use for everything pretty much, except like flipping hooks. Flipping hooks are different. They have the keeper on there, and it's more of a straight shank hook that I use for flipping. Um, the jerk bait. So this is the Jackall Squad Minnow. This is the best jerk bait made, period. Smithwick makes a good jerk bait and everything, but this is the bomb right here. If I'm not doing, so in clear water, if I'm not doing the Carolina rig, I'm doing the jerk bait, and there's two ways to do it. Either you have a jerk bait that looks ultra real in clear water, and you make long pauses, and you snap it very erratically to where it darts hard, and then it sits in front of their face, and you snap it hard erratically again, and it darts, and it sits for a long period of time. It's like a taunting. You're like taunting the fish in a negative state, and they end up reacting to that really well. Sometimes it'd be like explosive the way they attack it, but most of the time what I do in the clear water is not let them get a good look at it, so I'll reel it and jerk it like as quickly as possible so that they just can't really recognize that it's not real. And plus, it moving so fast and quickly, they just slap at it, and you can tell when it's reactionary because a lot of the fish that you catch aren't getting hooked in the mouth, they're getting hooked on the sides or whatever because they're just trying to swat at it. But Jackall makes several different, a lot of different colors. That one there that's shown is pretty good. There's variations on it, so I use like a really clear one. There's one that has like primarily white with a little spot on the side, with a little like green on the back. I mean, there's a lot of really natural color tones, and pretty much anyways, when I'm fishing jerk baits, I think it's a super visual technique. So why would you fish a jerk bait that's not clear? I mean, why would you fish? First of all, I wouldn't be fishing a jerk bait in stained water because it is a visual technique, and there's no vibratory component to it, so you're not appealing to the fish's lateral line as much anyway. So naturally, if I'm fishing clear water, I want clear color tones because I'm not going to throw clown or something, um, a clown color. But anyway, I'm going to use all natural color tones. That bill in the front, I adjust the depth of the bill, the length of the bill to fit the depth I'm fishing. And then sometimes if I need to and I can't change the bill, I'll change the pound test I'm using and go smaller. And the smaller the pound test, the better the action because it cuts more freely with the pound test, and it moves around the eye better and everything. It's just the way to go. But that's the best. That is the best jerk bait, period. I've used that jerk bait for a long time, and I consider myself a specialist in jerk baits and finesse fishing and stuff, and that's the one right there. Like I said, I'm not sponsored by any of these companies, but that's the one right there. Period. That's the only jerk bait to me to get. But let's see what else I got here. Drop shot, I do that a lot. I was just talking about that. But okay, so with this drop shot scenario for this type of fishing on main lake points, going back to my little diagram here, the drop shot's really only effective as long as the weight's on the bottom. So I wouldn't fish the drop shot over here on the edge. It would have to be up here. And most of the day, like I'd said, unless they're in a feeding disposition or the cloud cover comes over, or the current changes and there's a little wind or something, this is not a super effective place to be. So I may cast that drop shot for the first couple hours of the day or something. If they're transitioning from shallow to move out here and suspend, that transitionary period while they're in here, I'll throw the drop shot, but that only lasts like an hour or two maybe. And even at that, I'll have to do a long leader on it. I'll do like you know, almost a 2 foot leader on my drop shot sometimes, and just as much as possible to keep it off the bottom. So being that you've got this border here and this border here, and that's the transitionary area, that's only like 2 hours, in the morning that you can use it. Then you have to adjust. If you're throwing your drop shot out here and it just sinks straight down, and you're down here somewhere, which you're not even going to be able to know where you're at because you can't feel the bottom because the weight's not touching the bottom. Um, what's the point? They're never going to see it. And then the other thing is like, if you don't want, to me, you want the bait touching the bottom, or the weight touching the bottom all the time, and I don't even really move the drop shot very much at all. I just keep the weight on the bottom, and the waves make the action of the drop shot kind of quiver a little bit, and it works that way. But um, that's one thing I think is like why would you fish this drop shot in the middle of the day when they're suspended out here when you have your bait that you're only going to feel it along this area here, and then it's going to drop off and you're going to have no contact with the bottom and the fish aren't going to see it, and you're in this lower layer anyways where there's not a lot of oxygen, so it makes no sense to me at all. But yeah, I will use the drop shot periodically throughout the day if I feel like there's some windows when they come up here to feed, or they kind of approach this transitionary area more. And there's sometimes when you could throw up here and the fish will, you can bring them towards the bank. That's another point that I want to make. That's a huge point that I want to make. Is that if you cast from out here towards the bank and pull off the bank, you're effectively pulling the fish off the point because they're following that bait, and you can pull a group of fish off the edge of the point. But if you come out on the bank here and you cast out this way, you're pulling the fish towards this little dinner table right here. That makes 10 times the amount of sense. So it's like super, super advantageous, okay? Like I said with the Carolina rig when I was talking earlier, you can cast from out here to the shallow and drag it off, but by the time the weight makes it over this little dip here and the bait just goes real quick whoop, down the bottom of the slope, it never even makes it in front of the fish's face. And if it does, it's pulling the fish off this point. This is where you're wanting to be with your bait, right? I mean to feel the bottom at least. Obviously the fish is over here, so you don't want to be fishing for fish that aren't there, but if you're instead on the bank, like I was saying, you cast out with your Carolina rig, for example, the bait comes down with the weight in front, the weight makes contact here, the bait's still falling down in front of the fish, and then you've got the weight and the bait somewhere in this area. And then from the bank. And then while you're pulling it up, the bait's climbing as well in front of the fish. It's staying in front of the fish, and the fish is getting pulled towards the bank from this negative state that it's in, and it's becoming more like neutral, to where maybe there's a better chance you're going to catch it. Super key. I mean, that's like the way that you fish the point. That's why it makes a difference. It's because of the mechanics behind the fishing. The mechanical side of fishing is the most important. Period. So that's just super important. Anybody who knows offshore fishing will tell you that you can pull fish around on a school. You can pull them around on the structure and move them. So I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to move fish out. I want to move them towards the point where they're easier for me to catch. And if they're suspended, they're more in a negative state than they are when they're up ready to feed, or at least you got their interest. So let me see what else I've got for you guys. The drop shot we talked about. Oh yeah, the Palomar knot. I use the Palomar knot for everything. Some people say, oh, you shouldn't use it for fluorocarbon, but the people have been tying the Palomar knot forever. I know fluorocarbon's pretty new to the market, relatively new, but all you got to do is wet your line and just make sure that the net knot doesn't burn. Just tie a good knot. Tie a good knot and wet the line. You'll be fine. I always nose hook everything as close as on the drop shot. I always nose hook everything as close to the tip of this fluke as close as possible, because the more you go towards the body, the less action you have. So I'll almost go to where it's barely even in the nose here, just so that it just barely sits on there and has as much free spinning action as possible. The drop shot weight, there's like a ball shot weight, shot style weight, and then there's this cylindrical type weight. To me, the ball shot style weight, if you're fishing around rocks, is a nightmare because you're constantly getting snagged, and you have to shake your weight and go over there and get the boat over the top of where you're fishing, and shake your weight and shake your rod and get it out. The cylindrical type weight slips in and out of cover way easier, and I think that's the best weight to use. If I'm in an open area, I would rather have the ball shot weight because it has more surface area in contact with the ground, with the structure. So it being barren like that, and then have that contact, more contact, you get feel better. Number one, but number two, it's not going to get hung up in the rocks because there are no rocks in the area. So that's kind of how I distinguish whether or not I'm going to use. But like 75% of the time, I probably use this cylindrical type weight. The hook that I use is just like a little I don't even know what you call it. It's just like a little mosquito hook. It's just a little circle hook. And it's pretty small. I use small hooks for that. I don't. Some people use like a Texas rig style, like worm hook, whatever. If you're using bigger baits, I guess you can. I don't use a ton of big baits on a drop shot. Sometimes, whatever, but not really. Um, but I do a lot of drop shotting of flukes. I talked about the jerk bait. I feel like, obviously this is the best one to get. There's a lot of really good natural colors, and there's a lot of differences as far as the bill is concerned. Sometimes, like there's been times when I've been fishing a jerk bait in the middle of, hotter than heck, and it's 110 degrees, and I'm fishing over the top of the tree, watching the fish, approach it, and you just snap the rod tip and the line on slack line, and it darts, and then you just sit there for like 10 seconds, snap it again really hard, and it being, as long as it's supernatural and the light kind of penetrates through it in a way that it doesn't give them a good look at the surface of the hard plastic on the exterior, that silhouette looks really attractive, and they'll just absolutely murder it, and they'll come through the trees like a rocket. So it's pretty neat. But yeah, you gotta have premium hooks. The longer your line is out, the less hook setting power you have. So if you're fishing deep, you absolutely cannot skimp out on your hooks because you need them to be as sharp as possible. Gamakatsu, I think, is the best brand of hook, period. I know that there's other ones out there, and like I said, I'm not sponsored by these guys, but this is the way to go. Seaguar, we talked about that. Tungsten weights, I think, is an absolute must. I mean, why would you cheap out on the tap that you have to your fish, the connection you have to your fish? If you use lead weights, you're gonna have to use a huge weight, number one, to achieve the same depths as you would with tungsten, because tungsten's more dense. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is just that you can't feel the bottom, and you need to feel the bottom to identify the little areas where there's differences, like whether there's a big rock and then some gravel, or it's like a bunch of rocks, or there's some sand or something. You need to be able to feel those differences to identify the areas where there's unique places where the fish relate to. So tungsten, if you can afford it, is the way to go, period. I mean, make the investment. The swivels, that's a standard crane swivel. Like I said, I don't really go glass bead. I mostly go plastic. Long leader, that's super important. Longer leader, the harder it is, the longer the leader, so that it glides longer and it's more of a lazy type presentation with the bait. Talked about my super fluke that I love, water stratification, and that's about it, guys. So if you want to check out my website, bushwhackerbaitcompany.com, I have of course, it's my guiding webpage. I wrote a two-part book that I'm really proud of, and it's pretty quick read. It's just got really essential items in there and theories that I have on fishing and ways that I do my trade. Clayton Westfall, that's my YouTube channel, and then my Facebook. at Bushwhacker Bait Company. So check it out, and hope you enjoy. I hope this helps out.